Okay, everybody, our YouTube channel is back. And as we start 2025, I want to talk to you about the experience of joy. I love what David Brooks says about joy. He says, if we steer towards joy, we'll always end up at the right spot. And I think that's so true because if we just, steer our lives in a way and be intentional about experiencing joy, I think we're going to have a much better chance of getting there. So today I want to talk to you about three kinds of joy, especially as we start 2025, that maybe we could steer our lives there. And recently, I just experienced these three kinds of joys all coming together. It was last month at my son Sam's wedding, and it was at that occasion that all three of these joys, I was experiencing them as one, but what I reflected on was, oh yeah, these joys have traveled with me all my life. And so let me tell you what happened, how they came together. So we're at the reception, Sam and his wonderful new bride, Katie, when all of these three joys came together. Now, of course, all weddings are special. And this one was different. You're going, sure, it's your son. But no, this one seemed to gather the very essence of life, of love, of togetherness, of community. And it just brought it alive in the most tangible way. And the whole night was marked by, of course, collective ritual, but then this shared, transcendent experience that went beyond our lives individually. It was like collectively. And so at the reception, as the music kind of flooded the whole room, everybody went onto the dance floor. Now, I've been to a lot of weddings, but this wedding, 99% of the people was dancing. And it was as if joy and togetherness had claimed the whole room. There was no hesitation. There was no self-consciousness, only this pure, unbridled celebration. Now, of course, I know in every culture, dance is an expression of joy, but at that occasion, it became the symbol of the celebration. At several points in the evening, we all circled around Sam and Katie. We were tightly packed on the dance floor, and it really was as if love and happiness, like radiating from them, was just pulling us into their orbit. And then at one point, one by one, Sam and Katie called, individuals in this big circle to come into the middle and dance with them. It was like it was close friends, or it was dear siblings. It was even 80-something grandparents. It was even me. And we each stepped into the center, and we bounced and we swayed and we danced with them. And there were just all this laughter and cheers. It just erupted everywhere. And it was a moment of sheer togetherness where love was tangible, connection was undeniable, and joy was just overflowing. And you could hear the roars of joy and laughter. It was echoed in the whole place as we just all gave ourselves entirely to the moment. We danced for them, for sure, but it's like we were all dancing for us, the hope of their love and what it was represented, but also the beauty of life lived in togetherness. We all danced with abandon, and we just gave ourselves up to this joy in the moment. It was like it was something transcendent, and it was a sacred moment for me. And for sure, this memory will stay with me the rest of my life. But what it did do, it had me reflect on these three kinds of joy that have traveled with me. And one of them is a relational joy. It was this coming together. We were all connected by love, this shared celebration, our hearts knitted together, just this communal expression of joy. But there was also this self joy, how each one of us individually let go, no self consciousness. We just all surrendered to the music and to the deep personal delight. And then for me specifically, there was a spiritual joy that just seemed to transcend the here and now. And there was just this sacred enchantment, a glimpse of the divine just woven into our lives. And in that moment, joy kind of shattered the ordinary. And for me, it was a reminder how joy can break down walls. It can open us up to the beauty and the sacredness of life in the world. And it was really experiential. It was joy in its purest, most transformative form. And it's a joy that I'm going to carry with me always. I'll always have that memory. Now, let me say something about these three kinds of joy, and then I'm going to share more in a moment. These are the three kinds of joy that I have experienced in my life, and they've been the most profound experiences of awakening that I've ever encountered. For me, they go beyond, happiness or even powerful pleasures, but they're more of a sacred encounter. And these three kinds of joys, well, they have reshaped my life. They've challenged my presumptions at time. They have shattered parts of my shadow self that I have unconsciously constructed at times in my life. I like how David Brooks described joy, and I think it applies to these three things. He said, joy arises from contact with something boundless, something pure and spiritual that transcends the limits of our understanding. For me, true inner joy, it constantly challenges my illusions, my constructs, and it wakens me to a spirituality and a world that truly is, not a world that I have created. And grasping reality, I think, is iconoclastic, and I think it is at the heart of Christian spirituality. And this kind of joy tears down walls that separate us. It encourages us to be our true selves. These three joys, they bring communion in our lives. And I think Christ's teaching reflects this kind of reality, urging us to relinquish our illusions of control and just embrace the radical boundarylessness fathoms of God in the spiritual life. And there is a kind of growing spirituality that I think is capturing this essence, viewing joy as an encounter with the infinite and breaking down from rigid dogmas to make room for the unfolding presence of God, tethered to our lives, this inner attachment of trust instead of just external transactions of belief. Because real inner joy, it's never found in static beliefs, I don't think anyway, or any kind of self-serving agenda. But it's in waking up to a reality that is enchanted, relational, divine. So let me explore with you these three kinds of joy that have been so pivotal in my life. And they are relational joy, they are self-joy, and they are spiritual joy. Now, let me say a few things about relational joy. Relational joy is the gift of connection. And it is born in the sacred moments when you are connecting deeply with someone else or other people. It's the joy of being known and being loved and being seen, as well as the joy of knowing somebody, loving somebody, and seeing another person. This form of joy, it's always going to challenge our concepts of self-sufficiency. It will always remind us, hey, we're not meant to walk alone through life. There's this interesting point in the Christian New Testament where Christ turns to his followers and says, I'm going to give you something new as a new priority in your lives, a new priority in your spirituality. And it's in John 13 when he says, love one another. And in the same way I have loved you, you love one another. This is how everyone will recognize that you're following me. When they see the love you have for each other. So whether it's the shared laughter of friends, or it's the comfort of a hand held in love, or it's the exuberance of an entire family celebrating together, joy just flourishes when we are deeply connected to others. Right? I mean, consider when you hold a newborn. When I just remember when I was holding my newborns. Or consider feeling the fierce protective love a parent has for a child. Or imagine the joy of when two people reconcile, they forgive, and they come together and love triumphs over division. These are moments, they just reveal joy relationally as a community. Now, here's the deal. Relational joy requires vulnerability. It's going to take the willingness to risk rejection and disappointment in hopes for authentic connection. But in the openness of taking that risk, it's when you and I discover a joy that's more enduring than anything we could ever create alone. And it shows us that we're not meant to be isolated beings. We're meant to be threads, like in a tapestry of human connection, woven together by love. And I think this is the heart of Christian spirituality. So as you look ahead to 2025, what might it be like if you go, okay, this year more than ever, I'm going to prioritize deep connections. I'm going to maybe reconcile some broken relationships. Man, that's relational joy. Now, here's the second kind of joy that maybe we could steer our life towards. And that's self-joy. This is the peace of self-acceptance. Listen, do you want to know when you can finally start experiencing real self-joy? Well, for me, it finally emerged when I came to the end of striving, of managing, of feeding a need for approval. And I learned to embrace myself with compassion and acceptance. Self-joy came from when I just rested in this acceptance that, I'm enough. And this kind of self-joy, that's also iconoclastic because it begins to dismantle any kind of perfectionism or self-criticism, our need to dominate in our inner lives. And I actually think Christ speaks of this in one of his Beatitudes in Matthew 5:5, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth." I love how the late Eugene Peterson translates this. His translation is, "You're finally blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less." That's the moment you find yourselves proud owners of everything that can't be bought. I love that. Now, the word meek that Jesus uses, well, that reflects a quiet, egoless, effortless strength. Meek actually means this powerful strength that is fully regulated, fully centered. It's like this power that's under control. The unfortunate part in the English language is weak reminds us of weak, and it gets that bad rap. But true meekness is anything but. And so when you are experiencing I am enough, your need to control or image management, to prop up, to pursue some sort of perfection performance thing, it starts to fade away. And if you and I can just learn to embrace ourselves with acceptance and compassion, you start to experience inner joy in kind of an effortless way. It just starts to arise when you can embrace I am enough. And joy ends up finding your inner soul. It becomes a real experience. You're now free from achievement or standard or religious weight because you just are. And God loves you just as you are. David White, the poet, he puts this beautifully, describing self-joy as the disillusion of self-consciousness and the meeting of self and world as one harmonious whole. In moments of self-acceptance, we experience an abiding peace that transcends circumstance. That is so good. So what would it be like if you look ahead to 2025 and you go, you know what, I'm going to embrace self-joy in my life like I've never done before? I mean, imagine the freedom of laying down the burden of perfectionism and then picking up the peace of accepting ourselves fully, and then the courage to live it out authentically. I mean, how might this change the way you see yourself or see others? So that's self-joy. Now let me end with the third joy, and that is sacred or spiritual joy. That's the mystery of the divine. Spiritual joy, at least for me, that's been the most iconoclastic form of joy, because it challenges not only our assumptions about ourselves and others, but it challenges our understanding of God. I think the parable of the prodigal son captures this kind of essence of spiritual joy when the father is looking and waiting for his son to return. And it says in verse 20 of chapter 15, "But while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. So he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him." The father's overwhelming love for his son, it just transcends any expectations. And it reveals a God who delights in us with a boundless exception, a boundless inclusion, an unconditional love. True spiritual joy, I'm going to tell you, it often confronts and maybe even tears down our versions of God. It did me, and so many I know. True spiritual joy, it can never come from when God is distant or your view of God is judgmental. It can never come from a God of shame and retribution, or a God who operates by moralism or rigid beliefs. That's not how any loving relationship would work. So why would it work here? And when you and I can finally give ourselves permission to leave all that and actually awaken to a living, loving God who calls us beloved, this inner spiritual joy, it's now no longer manufactured. It's just effortless, and it rises. And once you've experienced that kind of spiritual joy, You can no longer confine God or your spiritual life to rigid doctrines or static systems of belief. Real spiritual joy, it attaches you and attunes you to this unfolding, dynamic relationship with the divine. And it's only going to encourage you to seek deeper encounters with God's presence, with God's mystery and love, and then clinging to fixed answers and immovable theologies, that just becomes so uninteresting in a loving relationship. Because love is alive, it evolves, it grows, it widens, it changes. So looking ahead to 2025, what might it be like if you go, I'm going to go after my spiritual joy and my attunement to God like I never have before? And so really, in a sense, these three different joys, they are iconoclastic. They tear down small versions of spirituality. They confront in us our isolation, our ego, our unhealthy patterns or unhealthy versions of God, and they just replace it with connection, self-acceptance, and love. And in a fractured culture, these three joys, they really are a radical alternative. So this week, let me actually give you three practices that can help us embody these kind of joys. And maybe you could do one or all three at some point. So here's a relational joy practice. Maybe you could spend 10 to 15 minutes writing a heartfelt note to a loved one and just share your gratitude and love and or a joyful memory. Here's a self-joy practice that you can embody. Try practicing 10 to 15 minutes of mindful self-compassion. Reflecting where you've been hard on yourself and offer yourself compassion and acceptance. And then here's how you could embody a spiritual joy practice. Maybe spend 10 or 15 minutes in silence or in nature and just have a simple breath prayer that says, God, I attune my life to you. I am here present. So may we have the courage to embrace joy in all its forms, to let it tear down the walls we've built, and to let it lead us into a life fuller and richer and more beautiful than we could ever imagine. For in joy, we not only find ourselves, but we also find God, who is joy itself. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. It is so good to be back. And I'll see you next week. Peace.